John. Our main speaker today, of course, needs no introduction. Mike Ouse is a former minister and is one of the founders of Houston Oasis, a graduate from the Clergy Project, which is an online community of former clergy sponsored by the Freedom From Religion Foundation. Mike has served as executive director of Houston Oasis since its inception over 2 years ago. Today, Mike's title is called Only Human, Our Evolving Understanding of Human Nature, which he is uniquely qualified to give to us because he is, in fact, a human. Mike Ouse.
Thank you, I guess. Yeah, I learned a lot from your talk, Amaret, wherever you are. Oh, you're back there. I learned a lot. Thank you. It was really interesting. Just for future reference, if you're a future community moment giver, if you're going to do something that requires us to contact our insurance company before you do it, let us know. No, I'm just teasing. That was fun. I got a little queasy with that stuff. Okay. So when I was in first grade, I remember that they used to make this announcement over the PA system that would all the students in the motor skills class please come to the gymnasium. And when I heard that, I was wondering what I was missing. They have a motor skills class? They're learning about motors? How cool is that? Because you know when you're trying to figure stuff out when you're a kid, you can't make sense of it. And so I always wondered what, I never asked, I just wondered what is this motor skills class? And I thought maybe they're learning how motors work, or maybe it's like a early driver's education program, and I pictured kids driving around the gym in like those little cars the Shriners drive, and I had all these things went through my head about motor skills class, and all I knew was it felt like I was being left out, and it was something I wanted to be in. And then, of course, eventually later, I came to realize that, and I don't know when I learned this, but motor skills class was for the really uncoordinated kids, and it was definitely a class you did not want to be in. And I opened with that because for much of human history, that's how humans have made sense of the world, pretty much. Suppositions, guesses, stabs in the dark. And I'm not just talking about primitive societies and their kind of primitive creation myths and all that. I mean, even like philosophers with important sounding German names like Kant and Hegel, really, their work is just based on wasn't based on any empirical evidence. It was just assertions about how they saw the world. In a sense, they were just making stuff up. The way I made stuff up about motor skills class, they're just making it up. Of course, they make their assertions look good with difficult vocabulary and complicated, logical syllogisms and all that. But nevertheless, you start digging, and there wasn't much there. The other week, I was chatting with an old seminary classmate. We actually hadn't spoken since seminary 20 years ago, and he had seen my conversation with Richard Dawkins on YouTube, and he had apparently been kind of going on this journey of free thought too. He's working in the secular world, but so he reached out to be in touch, and we were talking, just reminiscing about when we were in seminary. And one time we took an entire semester-long class on the doctrine of the Trinity, and we remembered we had to write a paper about the immanent Trinity and the economic Trinity. And if you want to know what those are, I'll tell you later. But it sounds important. And here again, when you're in the theology world, you're dealing with people with, again, kind of important sounding German names like Tillich and Barth and these guys. And as I was talking with my friend, it was like, 20 years later, we finally realized that when you dig behind all the intimidating vocabulary and the centuries of deep thought on these topics, and you dig and you find out there's nothing there. And we just accepted it so long because it's the way our tribe saw the world. And for the longest time, it never occurred to me to ask where any of it came from. And it's not just religion. It's in so many areas of life. Our understanding of human nature is changing very fast. So many things we once just accepted are turning out not to be so true anymore, or at least a whole lot different from what we thought. So here's just a quick examples of our changing understanding of the nature of human life. Most of us were raised, and I know, and this is the deal, I just always have to throw in this caveat. Okay, you're a smart bunch of people, I get that. We have physicians and nutrition people and all that. So I'm ready to be corrected on anything I say, but just cut me a break because I'm an English major, please, okay? But where most of us, we were raised to fear fat, weren't we? It was fat is bad. The healthy food was lean meats, egg white omelets, low-fat yogurt, low-fat everything. It just made sense. I mean, it's fat, so it's gonna make you fat, right? It says it in the name. And then you just look at the grease and you can picture it clogging your arteries, you know? It's like, yeah, that's what that's gonna do. Well, it turns out that all the fat phobia started because of some very flawed studies done by a physiologist in the 1940s who said that fat was at the root of cardiovascular disease. And when he published his flawed studies, the United States government immediately jumped on the findings and put them in the nutritional guidelines, and it became conventional wisdom for decades. Now it turns out the researchers are suspecting that cardiovascular disease has a whole lot more to do with inflammation, and almost all fats can help build a healthy metabolism and support brain function. See, Amaret gets up here and tells you to avoid sugar, and I'm saying go eat some bacon. I'm not telling you to eat anything, okay? I'm making no recommendations. Like, I'm just telling you what I read, okay? No recommendations. It's different than what we thought, right? Here's from another aspect of human life. This one is from the New York Times just a couple weeks ago, and I quote, "Behind a half-century of policies to promote child development, there lies an assumption that children are essentially equally affected by the environments they grow up in, and that positive interventions like preschool education should therefore help all children. But what if this isn't true? Long story short, it turns out that there is some pretty good evidence that suggests that yes, in fact, some children are fairly fragile and quickly wither and fail to thrive when they are exposed to stress and deprivation, and they need lots of nurture and support and encouragement. But it turns out there's a whole lot of other children who are more like dandelions, and they can grow anywhere they're planted, and they're pretty darned resilient. Adversity doesn't affect them that much, and conversely, positive intervention doesn't affect them that much either. So they're just fine on their own. And so there are a bunch of kids that would benefit from preschool education. We talk about mandatory preschool for everyone. And here again, I'm not making apologies, saying what I'm saying. You know, these do have public policy implications if we're going to follow the rabbit trail of the research. And the interesting thing about this resiliency is there seems to be a pretty strong genetic basis for the difference in resiliency between some kids are orchids, and delicate orchids, and some kids are dandelions. Have you ever heard of toxoplasma? No. Toxoplasma is a pernicious little parasite that lives in mammals but can only reproduce in the gut of a cat. One of the ways it gets there is by infecting rats, and when it gets into rats, it hijacks their sex drive, making cats momentarily alluring to rats. I kid you not. And I guess this would be the ultimate fatal attraction, okay? Now, so toxoplasma lives in people too, which is why pregnant women are encouraged not to handle kitty litter or mess with cat bedding or anything like that, because in humans it can lead to stillbirth and other problems. But that's not the only thing that toxoplasma does to people. The parasite can mess with our brains and alter our personality too, kind of the way it messes with rats. It has something to do with, again, rewiring the dopamine system, anyway, what happens with humans, apparently it affects men and women differently. In one study, women with toxoplasma spent more money on clothes and makeup and were more flirtatious and promiscuous. Men who had toxoplasma ignored rules, picked fights, dabbled in risk, and were nagged by jealousy. Both men and women got into more than twice as many traffic accidents as the average with toxoplasma. In the United States, it's estimated there's about 25% of the population has toxoplasma. In the United Kingdom, it's about 50%. And they're saying in France and Germany, between 80 and 90%. That's just one microbe we're talking about. The microbe cells in our body outnumber our human cells 10 to 1. Sorry, germaphobes. Okay, yes. But the estimated weight of all the microbes you're carrying around with you right now is 3 pounds of microbes. So, are we still doing lunch today? And so the question is, okay, that's just one microbe. So if other microbes, in addition to toxoplasma, could be affecting our thoughts and behavior, possibly, it's not unlikely. I read recently about a possible connection they're seriously studying between some types of depression and gut bacteria. Well, if that turns out to be the case, this has huge implications, because if somebody's got depression that's caused by gut bacteria, the answer might not be to encourage them to cheer up or seek counseling or take Prozac. The answer might be something like eat more yogurt. Only research and time will tell. We don't know. And how are you doing for, I can't see. Oh, we're doing okay. So, and speaking of novelty-seeking behavior, it's not just toxoplasma that can do that. There's apparently also a genetic connection with a propensity for novelty-seeking behavior too. Do you remember the singer John Denver? Sure. You know, Rocky Mountain High, Country Roads, Take Me Home, all that kind of stuff. And actually, John Denver was the first actual concert I ever attended, which is kind of a little not cool to admit. But anyway, but he was a very popular singer. So anyway, do you remember how John Denver died? Yeah, it was an ultralight plane crash, right? He was flying his ultralight airplane and crashed into a cliff in California and killed himself. Okay, and it was an accident. But that always kind of puzzled me, because I'm like, man, here's a guy who, I mean, yeah, he was beyond the peak of his career, but he had all the money in the world. He could live a very comfortable, satisfying life, and all the things he chose to do, he chose to get up in a kite with a lawnmower engine on it, you know? And it's like, why would you do that? You know, but could there be a genetic, maybe he had a genetic propensity, maybe he couldn't help it. You know, it's just, that's the dopamine rush he needed. I don't know. So what are the real life applications that come out of our changing understanding of human nature, human behavior? I think there's lots of them. I'm going to share a few of mine. And if you got some ideas, I'd love to hear them in our comment time. We can talk about it together, I think, if we have time. I'm so going to tell you for me personally how this has impacted how I try to live life a little bit. For one, I think it suggests that we should strive for a healthy skepticism about our own thought processes at all times. Our knowledge is partial, our knowledge is provisional, and to always remind ourselves of that, especially when it comes to something dogmatic or ideological or political or anything like that, because we're all operating on, you know, we're all messed up, basically. That's really the whole talk, we're all messed up. But anyway, okay, here's an example. Okay, so for a while, one of my pet peeves has been turn signal usage, which apparently is like totally optional in the city of Houston. You know, if only everybody would use their turn signals. I mean, just think about it. Yeah, traffic would flow so much better if we just all did that all the time. There'd be fewer wrecks, we'd move more efficiently, all kinds of great things would happen. And honestly, how lazy do you have to be? You can't even lift your finger to make the thing go, you know. It doesn't take that much, and it's an act of consideration to other drivers. But now that I'm trying to pay more attention to my provisional, partial knowledge of humanity, my flawed understanding of human nature, I've been trying to be a little more kind of at least pseudo-scientific about it. Like, so, be a little more reasonable and not go off. Yeah, so maybe not exactly scientific, but I'm trying to pay more attention to how I was perceiving the problem. So one day, I did this for a couple of days actually, I started like counting the number of times that people did not use their turn signal, comparing it to the number of times that people actually did use their turn signal, and it really wasn't that many times. It's just that if you see like 2 or 3 people do it in a row, then it skews, you think everybody's not doing it, and it skews your perspective. And then I started thinking, among the people that didn't use their turn signal, how plausible was it that maybe some of them did not know their turn signal wasn't working? That's happened to me before, that's a possibility. Maybe they randomly forgot, because all of us randomly forget from time to time. And when you start factoring in all this stuff, I realize that it's quite possible that there is no vast anti-turn signal conspiracy out there. And it was mostly in my head and my perception. I also think that our changing understanding of human nature suggests the importance of striving to be less judgmental, more accepting, less condemning, both of others and ourselves, because we are often even harder on ourselves than we are on other people. I've been doing public speaking for years, and during those years, from time to time, when I'm speaking, people in the audience will occasionally fall asleep. And I mean, not everybody, but like, you or and as a speaker, and I'm up here, I'm talking, and then you're sleeping, and that's a little disconcerting. And then all this stuff starts going through your head while you're trying to give the talk, and you're thinking, am I really that boring? Or how rude, I've been working so hard on this presentation, the least you can do is postpone your sugar rush deal or whatever, And I would take it personally and get a little defensive. But see, now I try to put the best construction on it, because I think there are legitimate reasons why someone might get sleepy. Like, stayed up late with the kids, with a sick child, maybe they're on blood pressure medication, which can make you sleepy. Maybe, like Amaret said, they, had a little mini diabetic coma after the donuts, stuff like that. Who knows? I mean, it really happens. And so I'm trying to put the best, all kinds of possibilities. And then I, with my partial understanding, I'd have to admit that maybe I really am that boring sometimes too. So you have to take that into consideration. Also, I'm getting less aggravated with those aggressive male drivers who like to gun their loud, non-mufflered engines, demonstrating their significance and their testosterone and that kind of stuff. I used to think, what, sure, why do you have to, but now I think, okay, now that I know about toxoplasma, I can think maybe it's just the parasites working, and he can't help himself. See, I think the scientific perspective on humanity can help us to be more charitable to our fellow human. And we understand more what drives us, what's driving me, what's driving you. I think it can help us to be better human beings. For centuries, theologians and philosophers have speculated and argued about the nature of human existence. Is humanity fundamentally good with some flaws, or is humanity fundamentally broken and needs redemption, like with the doctrine of original sin? And it's gone back and forth for centuries, and the answer seems to be that we are a bit of both, and that dual identity is what defines us as human beings. Let me quote my favorite science writer, E.O. Wilson. In fact, I brought, I have a few of the books that helped me with my talk today, so you want to take a look at any of them. One of these, Diane Ackerman, The Human Age, which is this in-depth look at how humanity's existence has affected almost every aspect of life on the planet Earth. Fascinating book, just came out, highly recommend it. Anyway, this is E.O. Wilson from his new book, The Meaning of Human Existence. We are all genetic chimeras, at once saints and sinners, champions of the truth and hypocrites, not because humanity has failed to reach some foreordained religious or ideological idea, but because of the way our species originated across millions of years of biological evolution. So it came to pass that humans are forever conflicted by their prehistory of multi-level selection. The eternal conflict is not God's test of humanity. It is not a machination of Satan. It is just the way things worked out. And here's the line that really blew me away. The conflict might be the only way in the entire universe that human-level intelligence and social organization could evolve. And so, kind of what he's saying is, we're got to wrap it up, but we do have this. He said saint and sinner, right? To be human means that to live in that tension. If humanity, we have these selfish tendencies, right, which sometimes equated with sin in the Christian tradition or other religious traditions. Those selfish tendencies evolved out of the need to self-preserve and to survive as an individual biological being, but then we're also a social species, so we need to live with others. If we had been entirely selfish, societies would disintegrate, but if we were entirely altruistic, completely living for the crowd, we would become like ants or bees and other social insects that are just kind of robots. And in fact, this tension that theologians and philosophers have struggled with over the centuries is the very essence of what it means to be human. And it's the very source of our creativity. And when I was religious and we talked about heaven, and heaven is always this place of just like kind of pure perfection, right? Where nothing ever went wrong and there was no conflict and all that. But when you think about it, like how boring would that be? If there were no conflict, no challenges, no problems, we wouldn't have great literature, none of our great literature. We wouldn't have our great music. All kind of the essence of what we are as human beings has come out of living in this tension between the dual natures of our individual and altruistic tendencies, saints and sinners, champions of the truth, hypocrites all. That is our story. We're stuck in it, but let's just enjoy it together. That's all I got for you. Any comments or questions or anything? Yeah, Tim.
What's the name of that parasite again?
Oh, toxoplasma. I wish we had our big dry erase board. I would have written a lot of stuff.
Is that the same thing that Daniel Dennett talks about? If it gets in an ant, it causes the ant to try to crawl to the top of blades of grass?
No, that's different. There's a fungus that does that, and there's a parasitic wasp that implants eggs.
Oh, right. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Intelligent design. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Right. Pernicious fungus, pernicious parasites.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up the loud trucks and the big tires, or the shiny cars with the big rims, and the loud music or whatever. I used to quandary over that too, and I finally come to the conclusion in myself is that's just the human equivalent of, or the male human equivalent of peacock feathers.
Sure. Yeah. For, I was going to say something unkind. Marina.
So one of the things that I realized is in moving to the U.S., almost a couple decades ago, was that what was normal where I grew up was by no means normal where I went to. And then, even moving from St. Louis to Houston, it was a completely different set of normal. And it made me realize that I don't know Jack, and that I can't assume I understand why others are doing what they're doing.
Very good. Very well said. Couldn't agree more. And there is some scholars are speculating that things like like a really strong prevalence of toxoplasma in a given population, and perhaps other things, could account for some what we consider cultural differences. I mean, imagine if you had like a nation or a tribe or whatever where like all the males are just like hyped up on whatever, and it's you become like very aggressive. I mean, it's interesting to consider how some of this stuff has affected the development of human history, human civilization. E.O. Wilson likes to say, and this is one of his, he likes to say, you can't understand history without prehistory, and you can't understand the prehistory without biology. Which it all ties together, because we've heard like the prevalence of mystic visions in certain parts of Europe during the Middle Ages now possibly being tied to, what's that, is it ergot? The fungus in the wheat that has hallucinogenic properties. There's all kinds of stuff that I'm sure we don't even know yet that has driven history. They think the ergot infection may have been behind the whole Salem witch trial thing. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry, we had one over here and then over here. Yeah, Bob, I think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you were saying about the conflict arising from the fact that we're humans, that we're a social species. But I don't think that defines humanity. I think there are many other animal species where you can observe those conflicts between self and society in social animals. Dolphins have the same level of intellect that we have. What makes us human, I think, is the combination of our intellect and the dexterity, which has allowed us to create ways of passing on the knowledge to subsequent generations so that we can build. And that's what the dolphins miss.
Okay.
Or monkeys.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Catherine.
So this is a two-part statement, so don't start yelling at me after the first part. So this parasite may be responsible for the mass hysteria in the United States over football. That's the first part. And the second part is I have never understood, coming to the States as a college kid, even though I'm an American, I've never understood football because it's worse than the Hunger Games, because parents willingly throw their kids out there to get concussions. And is that part possibly of this parasite making parents throw their...
Well, that would be... Yeah, I mean, it's definitely could be part of it. I think the whole sports psychology thing, too, is fascinating. That's probably that would be a topic for another day. There's a lot of it's massive. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let me tell you a story along those lines. I was at the MC's about to cut me off. I'm sorry. No, I'm teasing. I was at the University of Michigan football game when I was at school there. We once had a great football program a long time ago, and in the big house, the biggest football stadium in the country, and 100,000 plus people every week. And when the marching band comes out and they play the Michigan fight song, which I think is a pretty darn good fight song, every time, and it's called "Hail to the Victors," and every time you sing the word "Hail" at Michigan, everyone puts their fist up in the air, and it's kind of powerful, and this. Swept up, and then I had a classmate who was with me. We went with friends, and she was a young Jewish woman, and said her grandparents had been in the Holocaust, and she said, and we were all excited about this, and she said, "No, I'm not excited because it kind of scares me when I see 100,000 people doing the same thing at one time." Yeah, different perspective. Yeah. Did you have a comment there?
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say, along the parasite thing, we should also probably be careful not to just immediately dismiss everyone we don't understand as being parasitic.
Right.
The other difference we make clear we have the parasite.
This is, right. No, we can't diagnose it from its thing. But now we're all going to be wondering who has it.
Yeah.
But we have a brief time here. It's obviously far more complicated than that, because it's not just the existence of the parasite, but it's how that the influence of the parasite on the psyche reacts with obvious external circumstances too, and genetic tendencies and the way it all interplays. And it sounds to me, from my limited knowledge, that they're still trying to decipher all that, and untangle the web to think through that. So I think we pretty much run out of time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eric. Thank you. And